Hi everyone and welcome to Inderes TV. I'm here today with CEO of Mendus, Erik Manting. Very much welcome.
Thanks, Isa.
Nice to have you here.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. You're having an update today, here in March. What will be the most interesting takeaways for the investors?
Well, I think we've taken major steps as a company, starting with data we reported end of last year in acute myeloid leukemia, which is a very difficult to treat disease. And that comes with it that you have to take and think ahead of the operational steps you need to take to deliver such a product into late stage clinical development, and in the end, to make it available for patients worldwide. And last year, we were able to do a significant financial raise. And as part of that raise, we were able to also secure a manufacturing alliance with a company called NorthX Biologics, and they're based here in Sweden. The reason that was so important is that to support late-stage development and in the end commercial launch of a product, you need large-scale manufacturing. And at Mendus, we had in our own labs developed a manufacturing process which is robust and which is also scalable, so that we can use it for in the end large-scale manufacturing. But we are not a factory. We are not a GMP facility. So GMP stands for good manufacturing practice, and you have to be able to manufacture materials in a GMP manufacturing facility to be able to use it for clinical studies and in the end for the market.
So this is really important for the further steps, and the manufacturing process, I've understood it's also kind of a moat for you as a company as well.
Well, what people sometimes say is that anything which is related to cells, so therapies that are based on cells, and we have a therapy that's based on the use of whole cells, is actually the manufacturing process. Because the manufacturing process is so important to make something scalable, and in our case also off the shelf and readily available for patients, right? Because in the end, they need to treat patients. And that's what we have invested in a lot. And now we are in this collaboration with NorthX able to make sure that we also prepare for the real GMP large-scale manufacturing. So that was one big building block in the progress that we realized, and it's an update also today on where we stand with that collaboration. And the other very important collaboration we secured end of last year is with the Australasian Leukemia and Lymphoma group. And they are a very large organization already active for over 50 years in the development of novel treatments for blood-borne tumors. And they are willing to work with us on a sizable randomized control clinical trial with standard of care. And that was a big hurdle that, as a relatively small company and still relatively early, let's say, in the next step in the expansion of the clinical development, was for us a very important step. Because in this collaboration, we can do a trial up to 140 patients.
And that's a much bigger group than you have been doing before.
Yes, so initially, and that's always a good first step, we looked for monotherapy data. And monotherapy data are, I think, in the end, always the most convincing, but they're very difficult to get to, because basically you're asking patients and doctors to work with you as a company to try a completely new product, in our case Vididencel, as a potential treatment in a disease that is, in the case of AML, very deadly. So the fact that we were able to get to monotherapy data with a group of 20 patients was one of the very important milestones we achieved as a company. And what we also discussed today is how potentially relevant those data are for AML patients globally. But to then make a big step towards a randomized controlled trial with standard of care, including the patient numbers I just mentioned, so more than 100 patients, that's a relatively big step if you have to take it by yourself. And now with ALLG, which is a very renowned group, and also the principal investigator, Andrew Wei, is a very respected global KOL, we can do this trial in a very good and attractive setting without losing time. So I think with the steps we took last year, which is the financing, setting up of the alliance with NorthX and expanding the clinical development with ALLG, we took very big steps in the development of the company and the product.
Are there any other reasons for the collaboration with the ALLG?
Well, if you look, let's say, a bit further down the line, what you want to achieve as a company is that you can run a global registration trial.
Yeah.
And a global registration trial, of course, requires a global clinical trial network.
Yeah.
And that is what we are currently building up. So with the phase 2 trial that is currently ongoing, the Advanced 2 trial, we had built up a network of European hospitals. So we're working with 10 different academic hospitals to run that trial. We have also already opened the IND, which is a regulatory dossier with the US FDA, to be able to run trials in the US.
Yeah.
And now with ALLG, we have also secured a network of centers in Australia, New Zealand, and a number of Asian countries. So
you're
it's also
already
part of
broadening the geographical network.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's really nice to hear. So, what about? I've heard in your Q4 presentation that there have been some. You mentioned potential broader positioning in terms of patients when it comes to Vididencel, which is the lead we're talking about now. Am I being too positive here, or can you draw some conclusions from that already, or is it just? Could you?
No, I think it's good that we mention this topic, Isa, because as a company we look for data-driven decisions. So we look to compile data in our clinical trials first. Sometimes also in a preclinical setting, but in the end, the clinical trials have to deliver on the possible promise in a specific patient population. So that's the guiding principle. And when you start to see in a certain setting the data we are seeing now, which is promising durable clinical remissions in AML, with a very strong boosting of immune responses, I think it's logical to think also in how you could apply that to broader patient populations.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to say, and that is more also the mindset of the company, is that once you have a winning signal or potentially winning signal, you have to put everything in place to make sure you can pursue it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me also be clear. Absolute top of mind for the company as a whole is to make sure that we can deliver late-stage development of Vididencel in AML.
Yeah.
And then comes everything else.
Okay, but some positive signals on that as well, the broader stuff.
Well, I think there's rationale to, because the broader picture is that immuno-oncology, or the treatment of cancers by applying the immune system, has seen a lot of progress in solid tumors, but not in blood-borne tumors.
Yeah.
So once you start to see that it's possible to develop an immunotherapy in a blood-borne tumor, which is so aggressive as AML, it naturally leads to the assumption that you could potentially also broaden it towards additional patient populations. And initially, with that we mean AML maintenance, because there's more and more methods for cancer as a whole, more and more treatments, I should say, to get patients into a first clinical remission. And that's also for AML the case. But to make sure that patients don't relapse, so that they don't have a very quick recurrence after that initial treatment, that is still a largely unresolved medical need. And that is where we start to see now very good results with this approach. And therefore, on the one hand, this sets the agenda for the company. And on the other hand, I think it's fair to state that this principle could hold up for additional indications as well.
Yeah, interesting for the future. If you look a little bit further down the line, because eventually all cooks down to registration, as we mentioned earlier, and now you have the geographical spreading as well, but also commercialization. So what would the steps be in order to move to this phase, the pivotal stage?
Absolutely. I think the most important is that you make sure everything is moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And
where you are now.
Yeah, where we are now. And also, importantly, we have very active dialogue with the regulators, which is mostly the US FDA, and in Europe it's the EMA, but also with national authorities. But we keep a close finger on the pulse with the regulators to see what they think of our plans. And in the most recent interaction we had with the FDA, we got very, very positive feedback on all the questions we asked related to how we're going to move this program forward, not only with respect to the clinical trials, but also with respect to the manufacturing, for example, because that also involves a lot of regulation and changes, and you need to check on a very regular basis whether you're on the right track. And so the fact that we now have this positive feedback with respect to the main steps we need to take next, I think that is very encouraging for us to make sure we keep on moving. And then I think what's more speculative at this point, but we're open to, let's say, both ways, is how you're going to do in the end the heavy lifting to get the product over the finish line.
Yeah.
And there's different models for it. We've seen very successful companies in the past that have teamed up with pharma at a certain point, and that sometimes were very happy they teamed up, and sometimes they were less happy because they thought we could have done it by ourselves and kept more value.
So different kind of partnerships, models. Yeah.
It's one of those things that we should keep an open mind to. But there's also very successful companies that have taken drugs to market themselves and have also grown as an organization and become very valuable companies on that basis.
So what would you personally prefer at this point, or is it too early to say?
Well, I think for me the most important part is, first of all, to make sure we get the product over the finish line. And secondly, that we build a company that is, in the end, successful, right? And whether that means it's part of a bigger company or that we stay independent is, as far as I'm concerned, all related to, let's say, the terms that are involved, right? If we can do an attractive deal, we will do it. If we are better off keeping the value for ourselves, that's the route to pursue. But that's all in the game. It's also, to a large extent, not predictable today. But the most important mindset we have as a company is that we keep on moving forward. Like we also did last year, where we made big steps, but also now we know what the next steps are in order to prepare for a late-stage development strategy, and that we keep all options open. And obviously, a very close finger on the pulse with both the regulators, but also with the market and with the pharmaceutical companies. So we know where we're heading for.
A finger on the pulse and open to everything at this point. So from an investor's point of view, what should investors look forward to in 2024?
Well, I think first and foremost is the execution of our plans, which means the progress of the ALLG collaboration, the start of the AMLM22 Cadence trial, which we are collaborating on with them. It's the progress with NorthX Biologics. We've just successfully completed the first phase of that collaboration. So we have installed the manufacturing facility at Matfors for Vididencel, and we are currently working with them in the so-called tech transfer process. So we are actively transferring the process from the Mendus labs into the GMP environment. That's very important progress, obviously, on that front. Next to that,
high-end logistics there, really. I can imagine.
And teamwork. It's in the end teamwork, and that's going very well. And then we will, of course, progress the other programs that are part of our pipeline, which we haven't talked so much about today because they're earlier. But we are dedicated to also delivering on those. So we have an ovarian cancer program, which is in phase 1, which is ongoing, where we expect multiple readouts this year, including the primary readout second half of this year. We have a very different approach based on intratumoral priming with a product called Vididencel, in which we have invested a lot to make sure that product is ready to re-enter the clinic. So we're also aiming to re-enter that into the clinic.
So that's on track as well.
And we continue to work on our research, obviously, to on the one hand, fuel the deeper pipeline, but to also be an attractive partner for potential business development, for example. So I think we have a pretty busy year ahead of us. But again, the biggest challenge we are currently entering is to make sure that we get Vididencel into late-stage development. And everything is set out to make sure we are ready by mid-next year, in the third quarter of next year, ready to enter into that phase.
Okay, so third quarter next year, entering that phase. One final question for you, Erik Manting. Everything is drug development, and everything we've been talking about is there's a lot of risks involved, and you mentioned regulations, and you mentioned we were talking about the trials and so on. When you think about all these things, what keeps you up at night, and what makes you sleep well?
Well, I think what drives me and the company as a whole is the opportunity we have now to do something meaningful. Right? And
cancer isn't going anywhere.
That's it. And I think overall survival in a lot of cancer indications has not progressed as much as we wanted. IO, immuno-oncology, is still in development, and it's entering a next phase of development, and we want to be part of that. But you never know when you pick up a signal that is as striking as the one we see now in the phase 2 in AML.
Yeah.
Right, and for not too long ago, we were not sure if that was a good signal, and we've put everything in place, also with so-called immunomonitoring. So we look into the immune system of the patient after Vididencel treatment. And that was the major update end of last year, that we actually also really could see that we trigger very strong immune responses, and that those immune responses are associated with the durable clinical remission. So it was a lot of, let's say, science and preparation work coming together.
Yeah.
And now to enter that next phase, that gives so much energy, not only for me personally, but also for the company as a whole, that basically reduces everything else to proportions that we can deal with on a day-to-day basis. What we are, of course, talking about is money.
Yeah.
When you raise capital, last year we were in a very difficult market. And I think we were able to do a very positive event for the company, securing over 300 million SEK in financing, but also teaming up with NorthX, etc. So we've always found ways forward. And that's of course something that is always top of mind. So in that sense, that's maybe what's keeping me sharp. I'm not sure if it keeps me awake at night, but...
So you're sleeping well. You have the partnership, the trials are kicking off, and we're waiting for next steps.
I think that's a good summary.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Isa.
Thanks you.